It's Clark and Perry on the case.
Da-na-na-na, Clark and Perry, do what it takes. Da-na-na-na, Clark and Perry, investigate.
The activities and interests of local artists in the Windy City's finest throughout both Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, Alberta. Available on TELUS, Optic TV, On Demand, VidFlex, YouTube, and more for limited time only. Terms and conditions apply.
Da-na-na-na.
Hello, once again, to the Windy City's finest. I'm Clark, he's Perry, and we're joined once again by William. Now, we were just enjoying a hot day outside with some hot forging as well, too. So we're enjoying a nice little breeze as per the Windy City's brand. And, well, we have some lovely pieces kind of out in the background as well, too, to kind of show off here later as well. But first things first, I kind of wanted to take the chance and opportunity to talk to William about artistic processes and everything.
Totally. Yeah.
So why don't you tell me about smithing a little bit more? How did you first stumble into it? So it sounded like you first got introduced to it through the university.
Yeah, so it was one of those things where like I had seen stuff kind of like Fort Whoop Up where there was like the historical kind of like interpretive stuff going on, and that, like, you know, as a kid I was like, oh, that's cool, like that just stuck there, right? So I think the seed was probably planted pretty early on. And again, like kind of mentioned, love working with hot metals, whether that's bronze or steel. Like I love all that. And then had the opportunity at the forge where at University of Lethbridge here, they had a forge. It hadn't been used for 7 years.
Wow.
The fella prior to me who had last used it also was named William. And so the techs there just started calling it William's Forge because I guess, you know, something in the name we're attracted. Same with like William Gladstone, the guy who built the fort. Like, seems to be a talent there.
There's a lot of Williams.
Something in the name. And so, that jumped at that, got it cleaned up, and then threw myself into a lot of self-study, a lot of trial and error. Mentioned about those tongs, you know, it was a good challenge. It taught me a lot. And then there was a fella, professor at the university who's since retired, and he was like, I wouldn't say the resident blacksmith, but he had done some blacksmithing, done a 2-day workshop. And so he and I met about halfway through my term on the project, and we chit-chatted for about an hour. And towards the end of that, he's like, well, you know more than me, so you're now U of L's resident blacksmith expert. It's like, oh, cool.
Oh,
what does that
neat.
mean? So that was hilarious. And it was kind of fun because then later on, ongoing, there'd be certain students now and again who were interested, and they'd come up to me and be like, look, I'm also just learning, but let's go. And so that was a ton of fun. And then I did that academically for another 1.5 years or thereabouts. The pandemic hit, and so none of us could continue working in the studio, which was a bit of a challenge. But then a local smith here who I had been informally learning from, and I wouldn't go as far as say apprenticing under, but like definitely learned a lot of amazing things from him. He helped me get this forge and get it set up. We built an anvil out of railroad track, which was a ton of fun.
Right.
A lot of hard work, but it was, it was a first anvil and a first forge, and then like the rest is history. I've just been at it ever since.
That's amazing. So how long have you done this, like, would you say cumulative experience into forging, smithing?
So the smithing itself, I think we're going on close to 5 years.
Wow.
Thereabouts. Yeah. Definitely over 4.
Yeah.
So in that vicinity, and then like the metalworking in general, another couple on top of that. And then like my artistic practice spans back probably 9-ish years at this point.
That's amazing.
Almost a decade. I'm getting there.
Well, it sounds like as well too, like smithing, from what I've been able to gather, is quite. It's like a learning process that you learn through layers, similar to the folding the steel itself.
Just like Damascus. There.
Yeah. And so a lot of this knowledge used to be passed down. How do you find now, as a resident blacksmith, in your words, how do you continue learning at that point if you don't have anybody else that is that authority? You know?
That's a really good question. A lot of it, for me personally, I do try very hard to reach out to smiths, whether they're local in the southern Alberta area here. There's a handful that I've got to know and have learned immense amounts from just watching, chit-chatting and learning the struggles and hurdles that they've overcome, because a lot of it is passed on through trial and error and generationally, and so that's really cool, being able to connect with people here locally, but there's a really vibrant community of blacksmiths online as well, especially in mediums that allow video format, so like YouTube, there's tons of smiths on YouTube, One that like I really learned a ton from is an older fellow from the southern states, and like his work's phenomenal. The videos like are just like, you know, no nonsense, shows the whole process. He walks you through it. It's something where I feel like you need a bit of smithing to understand what he's getting at, but like once you do, like it's so cool seeing that. And like when I first started learning it academically, like I went to the library, there was like 2-3 books that were old and like not great and like more of an outside perspective on blacksmithing.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things, I guess stereotypically, if you think of smiths, a lot of us, you know, aren't the type to like sit down and write a book.
Yeah.
We want to keep doing the thing.
Yeah.
And so it's so cool where like, yeah, in this day and age, there's the ability to share that via video. And so that's something that I've learned a ton just watching other smiths virtually. I've connected with a few of them over the internet as well and learned more just through dialogue. But yeah, that's seeking it out as much as I can. Yeah.
So it from the sounds of it, it's more utilizing the collective knowledge of other experiences from the smitheries.
Yeah.
That's very interesting to know that it's such an old tradition, yet it has such a it's taking advantage of the boon of like social medias and ways to connect with folks as well too, like YouTube and visual things. I will admit it was very enjoyable for me to be learning from you because I am a very visual person myself. Like I have to learn by doing. So you're right. You probably wouldn't find a lot of scholars amongst the blacksmith community writing books about how to do it, when in reality they could just show you and you could just learn by the feel and
it's so interesting too, because like it's one of those things where there is such a oddly academic rigor and research to it. It's just not in the written word like traditionally you would think of when you think of research. But there is a lot of it there. A lot of smiths do connect and travel around and visit with each other. It's a big deal in the southern states and in Europe as well, where a lot of them will find each other and connect and talk through like, okay, I've tried this and that and it's not working, what about you? And so that is pretty cool, and that goes back into, you know, the Middle Ages and guilds and things like that, where a lot of it was shared in that field and not all that was written down. In our modern day, a lot of our research is focused on what's written, but that's not always an accurate portrayal of what's known. So,
no, that makes sense. A lot of that information could be lost, and especially I could imagine during the medieval times where not everybody was, say, literate or anything like that. That information could be lost or wasn't passed down properly. So.
And that's like a really, you touch on something really great there, where a lot of smiths like weren't literate, and if they were, again, they were busy. They weren't going to sit down and write a manuscript, and so a ton of them. We have lost as a field and as an industry. We have lost a lot of secrets of the trade. One of them that like a lot of people don't even think about or realize is the term bulletproof comes actually from the height of the Middle Ages, and you picture the knight in shining armor with the broad breastplate and everything. Bulletproof was when they had very early handguns. The smith would actually take you, the commissioner or the fellow who would, you know, purchase that armor. He'd take you to the armor, set it up. He would load up that early handgun, fire it, and you'd watch it ricochet off. That was bulletproof. We don't know how to smith that good. We've lost that. We don't know how they did it that well. Some of it's been replicated. There's smiths, armor smiths specifically in Europe especially, that have gotten close to that point, but there's definitely some secrets that were lost to the generations just because of a disconnect along those generations. But it's just so cool thinking about that, and certain types of swords that were almost mythical. Often when they were talked about in medieval manuscripts and stuff, they're given mystical properties, but often that was symbolic for just being an incredibly well-made sword or weapon of choice. And so it's really amazing, just like having that understanding of like we had reached certain areas, and this is seen in other fields as well, other art forms, and then lost bits of it throughout time. So it's cool being a smith now, where a lot of us, young or old, there's always this constant struggle and strive to try to re-achieve some of that,
Mm-hmm.
and then hopefully pass it along and down, so that we don't lose
It's like
it
a
again.
generational game of telephone. Almost.
That's a really good
Yeah.
way to put it. That's it. Yeah.
Okay, well, kind of taking a step back as well too. You mentioned that you've been smithing for about 5 years,
Mhm.
and then you consider yourself an artist for 9 years. Did I hear that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So smithing right now seems to be kind of like the means
Yeah.
to express that artistry. So
For sure.
where would you say that your artistic story began?
Oh man, that's a good one. That's a good one. I guess like for me, going way back, like my father is a professional wildlife and nature photographer.
Mhm.
So I grew up traveling across North America, immersed in natural beauty all over. Whether that was photographing polar bears, grizzly bears, mule deer, elk, or beautiful canyons, mountains,
Right.
seasides and sea stacks. And I was just like constantly as a youth bombarded with this beautiful imagery. And I had to do something with it. I didn't know what often at the time, but I'd say that creativity ran in the family and was something that was fostered by my parents at a young age. And I really wanted to share. That kind of evolved a lot throughout my adolescence. And then by time I was looking at a career, went to Red Deer College and had actually enrolled in education and English, wanting to be an English teacher. And, I got there and it was like the first day of classes. And I was like, no, this really isn't what I want to do. And like literally dropped all my classes and like scrambled and re-enrolled in art.
Oh, wow.
And kept parts of education in there as a backup, but like really focused on art. And that turned out to be like just divine, basically, where some of the profs that I met there, Ian Cook for one, influenced me incredibly. And like it was amazing timing. The peers that I was working with in the studio, we were such an interesting mix of people that were really pushing each other and such, but like in a very productive way.
So what did you typically work on?
Oh man. So I started and still I often go back to drawing, and especially subtractive drawing. If you're familiar,
drawing.
So with that one, the artist, I'll lay down like shaved charcoal onto paper or shaved conte or something in that direction, and then like massage that into the paper, and then actually take an eraser and erase the image back out. And so that's
interesting.
The way my mind works. That's like it just works for it. Like it really clicks. I found that in my first year under Ian Cook, actually, who also was a phenomenal drawer. He wouldn't admit it. He's a sculptor first and foremost.
Yeah,
but definitely a phenomenal drawer as well. And yeah, so really got into that and loved that. Working with toned paper, colored paper, basically, as well. And then removing highlights, adding back in more charcoal for the darker areas. So that was something that I really enjoyed, the depth that you could play with. And it was neat because that depth kind of evolved into sculptural work as I got through it. I started with ceramics and clay and plaster, and moved into wax, and that was almost a natural progression into the lost wax method and casting, and working with metals then, and then it just was metals pretty much the entire time after some sort of sculptural work.
So it seems to be you really enjoy making things. From what I've gathered, you really you enjoy working with these materials. What do you typically make out of these materials? Like, what would you consider like is your project? It sounds like you were heavily influenced by your parents with the nature of photography. Do you build something that resembles that nature, or what do you typically strive towards?
I definitely do. Kind of like I mentioned, I do find a lot of inspiration in the natural world. There's something beautiful about just everything that we're around. I was born in Canmore, so like even just the birthplace, like. If you've ever been, it's Canadian Rockies. Like it's you're
gorgeous.
just surrounded by beauty, and this majesty of the natural world. And so like, what are you going to do with that? Like it compels you to do something. And for me, again, with the animals, with the rest of the scenery, and even just seeing people interact with nature, especially at that point and where I was, there was a lot of like positive stuff. A lot of people living in the elements and living off the land. As I was growing up and meeting folks like that, and it was just amazing to see. And so for me, yeah, I take a lot of inspiration from nature. I take a lot of inspiration from how the viewer or participant interacts with the art. That's something that I really honed in on, especially the last half of my practice, last like 4-ish years. Really got really fascinated about like, okay, so I make this piece of art and then it goes somewhere, and then what happens?
Yeah.
I wanted to know the what happens, and I wanted to still have a bit of an active role in that,
Right.
and like cause questions with the viewer, cause curiosity, make people want to like pick things up and turn it. I'm very much of the mind of avant-garde artists where I'm like, interact with my art, please. Like,
Excellent.
go up and touch it. I don't,
Yeah.
you know, it's not the put it on a wall and put a rope in the way, you know.
Which
I
makes
want
sense
people
why
in it.
we enjoy making tools,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, and because that is what it is purpose for, is to
Mhm.
be engaged with and to be handled as well too.
Exactly.
Well, speaking strictly from your artistic perspective, and if it does include smithing, let that happen. But what would you consider your greatest accomplishment for your artistic career? So thus far, there's still much more to go.
Yeah, that is a good challenge. Good question. Oh man, because there's been so much that, as a maker, as an artist, even just like wrestling with certain mediums and getting into them, the smithing itself, like being a largely self-taught smith who, you know, I can make like some pretty decent blades and tools and things like that like, you know, I know are a challenge, and that other smiths have mentioned, you know, takes some skill.
Yeah.
So
Was there a
so
specific
just,
tool or anything that was probably your biggest challenge, biggest work?
again, yeah, probably like the blades, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
there is something really quite neat about that. And again, like as you heard earlier, like there's a good challenge between what type of qualities you're trying to get in that steel and work with. That's something that's really fascinating. There's like, you know, like I've got a CV with a bunch of rewards on it and stuff, but like the subjective of what other people find fascinating and what I find accomplishing, like a lot of the historical work that I've endeavored with, whether that's the stuff that takes place at Fort Whoop-Up or some of the medieval work, or just exploratory my own, trying to figure out how did they make this or that.
Right.
Like I've got one kind of dives away from smithing for a moment, but like I created or built from scratch a historically accurate Norse Viking tent, which I use quite regularly.
Oh my goodness.
And that was based off of archaeological findings off the East Coast, one of the digs that they found there, of Canada, and like it's just incredible, like being able to work from the specs that are centuries old,
Yeah.
recreate that, and then utilize that.
Yeah.
There's just something that really, I don't know, there's a neat
Challenging, but
discovery.
challenging, but a very satisfying when you figure out that new puzzle. Right?
Exactly. And it's neat because it's testing yourself as a maker, and as again, there's a bit of that research component to it.
Yeah.
But then also then being able to use it successfully, where it's just like absolutely so cool to see, like, oh, this is what they did. This is how it was. And these are the challenges that, like, you know, our ancestors and people had. Like, there's something fascinating about reliving that, reenacting that history, and then being able to share that is like the next part that I just love, whether that's, you know, through actual historical reenactment or even just through storytelling like this, or visually. You know, it's just awesome to be able to transcend time and space with your work.
Yeah, that's definitely one way to put it, for sure. So how about you help me walk me through how exactly you stumble upon, like, you mentioned this Viking inspired tent, or like, how did you, and yet you do smithing, and then you've also done like charcoal art as well too. Tell me about how you run into some of these things. What kind of drives that inspiration for you?
It's been like a strangely like organic and quite like natural seeming progression, and a lot of these, even though they seem way out there, there's this strange map of connectivity of all of them. And a lot of it comes back to, honestly, a lot of it comes back to interests in my childhood.
Yeah.
Like, you know, just the general, like, you know, knights in shining armor, just such a neat thing. I always had a crazy imagination and was like imagining being in these periods or imagining what some of the struggles might have been. And that just kind of evolved through my art practice, through studying history. And then like, yeah, like the smithing itself, like that was something where I got into a lot of the medieval realm and reenacting through some university groups and through Hacksaw, which again will be seen here. And like that branch out of me like, oh, whoa, people still blacksmith? What?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
so cool. I want to.
I think you inspired something in Perry as well too during that during this later feature as well too. It was quite enjoyable on my behalf as well too. There's something nice about, you know, you get that feeling of a hard day's work, right?
Yeah.
So like,
and it's straightforward. It's there, right? Like there's no complications socially or otherwise. You can see your work. It's honest. It's done. Like there's something neat, and it doesn't matter. Yeah, if you're building a tent or a sword, or something in between. Like it's so cool to work with something that you're directly impacting, and there's no nonsense.
Yeah. So there's a lot of trust when you've kind of stumbled upon something, and if it interests you that you kind of have connected previously to your childhood, or it's just something cool that you really want to dive into, you just kind of let it happen for the most part. So that really kind of leads a fulfilling life for sure.
It does.
It's a good way.
And something too, like I mentioned in the smithy, the idea of dying arts and stuff where they're fading out, and if nobody goes into learning them and then passes that on, they will just fade out of existence. And so that is something too, like certainly with the smithing, that attracted me to it, where I was like, this is something where we are watching it in decline. There's a lot that we've lost. There's parts that like continue out of necessity, fortunately, and like here in southern Alberta, there's a neat mix of that, where like you do have the farriers that still shod horses and everything, but a lot of it is like just fading. And so again, as someone who has the opportunity to jump in and learn the medium, and then of course like it helps, I enjoy it, but that's something that, you know, you can keep that alive. You can kind of preserve some of that culture and pass that on.
So what are you hoping to still accomplish? I guess
there's definitely a handful of secrets. I don't want to like presume to actually be able to crack, but there's a handful of like secrets in smithing that I'd love to try my
like
hand
what?
at.
Like what?
Again, like some of that bulletproofing armor. There are smiths who've tackled it, and it's great because they've pushed the field along. I'd like to help push that along further too. And of the smiths I've met, I'm one of the younger ones at the moment. And there's a handful of us that are like similar age group, where we're like, okay, we've seen this in the last generation, what they've been able to figure out and relearn and pass on. What can we do with it? How can we like reconnect to what it was and push a little further? So there's definitely stuff there like the bulletproofing and certain quality of steel and smithing that I'd like to do. I do want to get to the point where I can make actual battle tested ready, or battle ready, I should say is the proper term, of blades and stuff. And a lot of that's partially from my heritage, partially from the reenactment side and actually doing the medieval combat. There's something there that I want to explore for sure.
Right.
And like, you know, the rest is like seeing where it goes. I want to, you know, keep some of these dying arts alive. I'd love to keep apprenticing. There's been odd times here and there, even just with this modest moment with you and I, where like being able to share a little bit of the basics and stuff, like I love that. The more I can share it, the better.
I was going to say, like, I'd almost argue the point that I think it's far from dying. Because like, as I'll mention earlier in this episode, my only frame of reference for smithing is Forge and Fire, right? That has gained a huge amount of popularity and such as well too. But what I do notice as well is that you don't seem to be much of a person that's down for competition, right? It's more inspired to learn those mysteries that are kind of still lost as well too.
Yeah, it's one of those things where certainly like there's so many neat overlapping subcultures in
Yeah.
in art in general, but then when you get down into like the smithing and a lot of that, like reenacting and bringing back old art forms and old crafts and trades.
Right.
And so certainly the reenactment angle is very collaborative. There's a lot of that where, you know, a lot of us have the same mentality of wanting to rediscover the talent and share it. And then at the same time too, though, like it is pretty fun to, and with Smiths, I see this a lot where like there will be stuff that's shared and really encouraged amongst each other. But at the same time, you know, iron sharpens iron. You're both trying to like outdo each other a little as well.
Yeah.
And that's pretty awesome because it does, in a healthy way, does propel the field forward.
Right.
And so like
Everybody's
there's a
looking for
balance.
that
Yeah.
competitive edge.
Yeah.
One
Well
could
said.
say.
Good fun. But yeah. So it's one of those things where like, you know, I don't get too hung up on it.
Yeah.
I enjoy my work, and whether or not, you know, that's like a huge like whether or not everybody wants to clamor and buy it all, like, you know, whatever. Obviously it feels great. It's a huge compliment.
Yeah.
There's work that I've done, and like what I'll do for my commission work and stuff is I do like to chase meaningful pieces. And so like a great example is a year ago, there was a young couple that was getting married, and rather than having just a normal guest book, they wanted something like a little bit unique and out there that guests could sign at their wedding. They both had Nordic heritage, Scandinavian heritage, and so I was like, how would I make you a Viking round shield that's, you know, got the blank white canvas and then guests can sharpie their names on? And so did
Wow.
that. They loved it, and now it's above their hearth and has
That's
all their
amazing.
guests' names on it. And we did a little bit of battle testing, put some marks on the shield with real swords and stuff.
Yeah.
And so like it's such a neat story piece, right? And it's that connection, that union of the two in that piece. And so for me, like being able to symbolically be part of that and like, you know, add to that, give a bit of, you know, something unique and one off to them.
Yeah.
That means so much.
That's more of enrichment rather than the production. It's quality over quantity,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. The
No, that's
meaning
very-
behind the piece.
Yeah, and I find that a very interesting perspective. There's nothing wrong with it not being like not having a competitive drive as well too,
Yeah.
but seeing it more as a tool to kind of further the artistry. I think that's worth highlighting as well too. That's very important. Some people need to hear that.
Yeah. In general, like art's so much about the connection anyway, right? And again, like where I'm interested in that viewer and art piece interaction ties right back into it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's Clark and Perry.
On the case.
Da-na-na-na. Clark and Perry. Do what it takes. Da-na-na-na. Clark and Perry. Investigate.
The activities and interests of local artists in the Windy City's finest throughout both Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, Alberta. Available on TELUS, Optic TV, On Demand, VidFlex, YouTube, and more for limited time only. Terms and conditions apply.
Da-na-na-na.